So welcome everybody. For those of you that are sort of following the flow of the conference, we've had a remarkably fruitful and sort of deep discussion. This session is a little bit of a different take, still regional implications, but focusing specifically on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and sort of where it nests in the evolving geopolitics of the region. My name is Ilan Berman. I'm the Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. I am simply the guy who keeps the trains running on time for this session. So I'm going to turn over the floor in a second to our speakers. We have a distinguished panel of speakers, and we have another speaker who hopefully will be joining us shortly. But let me frame the discussion before I do this, before I turn it over to the speakers, because my sense is that it's necessary to contextualize where we are, where we've been, and where we're going, right? We sort of need to know what has happened, what has transpired, how things have evolved in the region in the recent past. And it bears noting that a fundamental shift has taken place in global thinking about the Palestinian issue. And especially sort of the way the region approaches the Palestinian issue. Previously, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was at the center of regional politics, and the conventional wisdom, certainly the conventional wisdom here in Washington, was that the conflict had to be resolved first as a prelude to progress on other fronts, as a prelude to, for example, normalization between Israel and the Arab world. Over the past 2 years, though, we've seen that that isn't the case. The trends unleashed by the normalization accords that are known as the Abraham Accords, where Israel has reset and solidified and formalized its relations with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco, with Sudan, although that's a work in progress, and hopefully in the future other countries as well, has really set the region on a qualitatively different path. The Israeli-Palestinian issue has migrated from the center of the foreign policy agenda, or at least the way Washington thinks about the Middle East, much more to the periphery. But the issue is still with us, albeit in a different context. So it's really interesting to try to figure out where we go from here. What are the dynamics? What are we seeing? So I'm delighted that I'm able to talk, to ask questions of right now, a duo, hopefully a trio of very distinguished experts. Let me introduce first Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser. Yossi is the former Director General of Israel's Ministry of International Affairs and Strategy and the head of the research division of the Intelligence Department of the Israeli Defense Forces. Our second speaker is Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, who's Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies here in Washington. And hopefully we'll be joined later by Dr. Ali Al-Naimi, who is a member of the UAE Federal National Council and the chairman of the Hidayah Counter-Radicalization Center. We're waiting on Ali. So let me throw it open to you, Yossi, and John, sort of feel free, after he's done, feel free to answer this as well. I thought sort of a guided tour through where we were, where we are, where we're going would actually be very helpful here. So let me pose a broad question to you. What are we seeing in the region in terms of both positive and negative developments? And how does this impact the Israeli-Palestinian arena specifically?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the ongoing tension between radicals, mainly today Iran, and pragmatists, mainly those countries who joined the Abraham Accords, but also I'll put in that list the two countries that we had peace with for a long time. They're still there, Egypt and Jordan, and to not lesser extent, I would say, Saudi Arabia. Yes, they didn't join the agreements, but these agreements were not possible without their consent and support. And I think what MBS said on his interview with The Atlantic, that was not published on The Atlantic, strangely enough, was also indicative of what we are witnessing, which is most pragmatic Arabs don't look at Israel as the problem. They don't look at Israel as the enemy. They look at Israel as a country that they want to have strong relations with, because their main problem is the confrontation with the radicals, especially with Iran. And this is another major change that happened, since the United States, in their mind, and in Israeli mind as well, seems to be weaker and weaker by the day, and less interested in the Middle East. Their interest of getting closer relations with Israel is growing steadily, and that's the thing that we're seeing. That's one thing that we're seeing. The other thing that we're seeing is that because the United States is getting weaker, not only Israel and the pragmatists get closer, but also another phenomenon that's happening is that the radicals get stronger as well, because the Iranians are just about to get a big chunk of money, and everybody on the radical side waits for this money to pour into their coffers, and they want to be able to use it, to be more capable to put Israel in a dangerous situation, and including in this respect Hamas and especially the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who are very eager to see this happening. And what happens is that because of these two developments, the Palestinian Authority, who is neither a part of this and nor a part of that, becomes more and more irrelevant. And this is not the only reason why this happens, but one other reason why the Palestinian Authority becomes less and less relevant. And one has to mention at least three other reasons why the Palestinian Authority becomes less relevant. First of all, it's aging, and its leadership is more and more detached from the reality and the ground. Secondly, the authority is totally corrupt, and you can't hide it anymore. And so everybody asks, where's the money, and why do they treat their own people the way they treat them? The story of Nizar Banat, so on and so forth, is very much present wherever you go. And thirdly, the authority is irrelevant. There's no elections. It doesn't have any legitimacy. It cannot control. It cannot function. It cannot enter the refugee camps of Jenin or to solve the problems between the feuding families of Hebron and so on and so forth. It just doesn't function. And it is kept alive with the money and the support of Israel, but it's in a very bad shape. And what's most important in this respect is that nobody believes its narrative anymore. That and they try to force everybody to stick to the narrative of the Palestinian Authority, which is the Palestinian narrative. That's also the narrative of Hamas. But when it comes from the Palestinian Authority, it doesn't sound convincing. And we see that their narrative, that you should deny the right of the Jews to have a state of their own, and so on and so forth, and that you have to struggle against it, but you have to, the way to struggle is the popular resistance. Or the main way of struggle is the popular resistance. This doesn't sell well. And actually it's challenged for both sides. And for the first time, it's challenged from the pragmatic side, not only by Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and all the other members of the Abraham Accords, but also by people from within the Palestinian people. I mean, for the first time, we have a situation where Palestinian, which is an Israeli Arab, but he considers himself a Palestinian, Mansour Abbas, comes and says, okay, Israel is a Jewish state, and there's nothing we can do about it, at least for the foreseeable future. We don't like it, but we have to accept it. This is something that is like blasphemy, I would say, for anybody on the PA, and that was the reaction to what he said. But you can say it and stay alive. It's something that is amazing for a Palestinian to say. And on the other hand, you have the Hamas, who's also challenging the Palestinian message and says, why only popular? We are totally in favor of popular resistance, but why only popular resistance? There are times when we need more than that. Just look at what we did in last May. So it's the entire philosophy that the Palestinian Authority is trying to promote lacks any real support from the public, and is challenged dramatically. And this is a situation where many people in the Arab world are saying to themselves, okay, we'll say something nice to the Palestinians, but we'll move forward because Israel can provide us with so many important things on the bilateral level and on the trilateral level that we can gain a lot. And we should say that we still remain committed to the Palestinians, which they are. It's not just a lip service. They are, but in a different way than the way the PA wants it to happen. Now the PA says that this is going to happen for a couple of years now. They were surprised by the fact that it did happen at the time that it happened, but they actually expected this to happen, and so it was not an astonishment. It was just a surprise, and because of the timing maybe, but not because of the fact that it happened. And nevertheless, they were caught totally unprepared. They caught totally unprepared. So what happens is that nobody now believes that there is any point in trying to promote any real solution to the conflict. There's no such thing. The Palestinians lost the Israeli public, which was very important for them long time ago, back in the Second Intifada. And they lost the international community following the normalization agreements. They lost the international community. Even the Biden administration doesn't think that we can promote now some sort of an agreement. They focus on keeping alive the idea of two-state solution while focusing on improving the living conditions of the Palestinians. That's the best they can do. Maybe one last word is about the Russia-Ukraine issue and its impact on that, because I think this is something that's very important. The Palestinians, because they were sidelined, were trying to catch everything in order to revive the struggle against Israel. Because this is their shtick. This is what they know to do, and they are now trying to do the same with they did it with the COVID. They did it with the big idea of, let's say that Israel is an apartheid state, and there are all kinds of tricks that they were trying to use in order to make it happen. Now the new toy is to say, okay, we are just like, look at the double standards. Why is it that the world doesn't treat us as if we are the Ukrainians? Which is, I don't think this is going to gain any real traction by anybody, because the differences, the opposite situation is the true way to describe it. But this is interesting to see that instead of opening up their eyes and realize that something has changed and that the cheese was moved, they stick to the old habits and refuse to listen to reality. And that is something that is costing them a lot, in my mind, when it comes to the future. Maybe if one day they will come to those senses, there's going to be some change, some chance to move forward. Right now, I'm not that optimistic.
Well, thanks for that. So, John, same question to you, but with a little bit of a wrinkle, right? You both of us just got back from the region, right? Separate trips, but what did you see? You know, how is the region evolving, and how does that impact the way you think about the Israeli-Palestinian arena? But also, right, the secondary wrinkle here is, how is official Washington thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian arena? How is the Biden administration approaching the issue? And does this really square with what you saw on the ground?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Ilan. Great to be with you, Yossi. Always a pleasure to appear alongside you. And I want to actually also thank Barak Senior, who I know did a ton of work to make today possible. So it's great to be with everybody. I would be remiss if I don't do this right now, that a lot of the thoughts that you'll hear today also appear in this book, Gaza Conflict 2021, just published it recently. And by the way, if you're a Hebrew speaker, Yossi, you need to get it in Hebrew.
I already read it in English.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then don't bother. But you'll be smarter if you read it a second time. At any rate, look, let me frame this as you've put it out there. I think first of all, it's important to note that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not getting a lot of attention here in Washington. We're making the pivot to Asia. We're obviously right now struggling with the news coming out of Ukraine. So there has been a greater focus on what we call great power competition. And I think all of that is underscored by the fact that our Palestinian-Israeli the problem set is being led by a relatively junior official in the U.S. State Department. And that is that's Hadi Amr. And so we're not seeing a ton of attention. We're not seeing a ton of manpower. There certainly are efforts right now to find ways to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. In the aftermath of the Gaza war, there's an attempt to try to breathe new life into the leadership there and to inspire more confidence in the government of the PA. But I think, as Yossi rightly pointed out, this is a government that lacks authority. It lacks respectability. Nobody thinks of it as an honest government. The corruption runs rampant. The leadership is aging. The energy that it brings to the tasks that it performs is very low. And so there's just not a lot of optimism. Very few people are sanguine about the prospects of the PA. It's really more, I think, at this point about marginalizing Hamas. And there, I think it's important to go back to what happened last year. The war itself, I think, erupted in part because of the normalization that we see around the region. In fact, if you look back at the reasons why the Palestinians initially decided to hold elections in April, those elections were, of course, canceled at the end of the day. And I think that's ultimately what led to the conflict itself. So just to back up, the Abraham Accords are signed in the fall of 2020. It's at that point that I think both the Hamas and the PLO realize that they are losing the hearts and minds of the Arab world, that if these 4 Arab states can normalize with Israel, it means that the Palestinian issue is no longer the dominant one. It's no longer driving the national interests of Arab states around the region. And so they decide that after being in a state of civil war since the year 2007, that's a significant amount of time here that we're talking about, that they decide after 14 years that it's time to hold elections, that it's time to unify the Palestinian people. They decide to, when this is going to happen, it's slated for April. The Biden administration, by the way, supports this, even though there are laws in the books, some of which were led by a guy you may have heard of named Senator Joe Biden, that would have effectively cut off the Palestinians from US assistance and US recognition if Hamas were to take part in a future government. It was ill-advised, to put it mildly, but nevertheless, they wanted to move forward, and the Biden administration was giving its blessing. Ultimately, I think cooler heads prevailed. Everybody said, you know what, maybe it wouldn't be a great idea if a terrorist organization takes part in this government. But it was all sort of driven by this desire to claw back market share, if you will, to have people care more about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, to care more about the Palestinian national movement. When the elections are canceled, that is what essentially spurs Hamas to try to win back the hearts and minds of the Arab world and of the Palestinian people. How do you do that if you're a terrorist organization that has now been bounced out of the political process? Well, you go to war. This is what Hamas has done time and again as a means to assert itself in the Palestinian-Israeli arena. And I think from there, that's where it's important to note. So the Arab-Israeli conflict has shrunk. It's not even shrinking anymore. It has shrunk. Yossi has already mentioned the main players here, Egypt, Jordan, and then on top of that, now UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, but then also I think we can point to other countries that have quietly normalized, that are working with the Israelis on some level, the Saudis being, I think, one, but there are others in the Arab world. There are a few outliers. I think notably the so-called axis of resistance, so looking at Iran, but also Iraq, Lebanon. These are countries that are never going to normalize because of Iran's influence over them. Algeria is another interesting outlier. It's a country that has really planted a flag with the Arab League. They see themselves as the sort of secular resistance against normalization. But during the war itself, I think it's fair to point out that there were 4 countries last year that were actively trying to stoke the conflict. They're actively trying to keep it alive. They're actively supporting Hamas during this war. And I would say that they are the primary funders and agitators that need to be neutralized if the goal is to continue to move down the path of normalization. And so I'll outline them briefly here. The first, of course, is Iran. Iran over the years, and I have to say, it was shocking to see that the short shrift that this was given during the war itself. It was one of the critiques that I leveled in my book, that people forget that Iran has been providing Hamas with hundreds of millions of dollars consistently since Hamas's founding in 1987, 1988. We are looking at just a huge investment over time, hundreds of millions of dollars usually per year for a small organization based primarily out of the Gaza Strip. They have used that that money to buy weaponry, to get trained in Iran, to develop new weapons or tactics, such as the tunnel system that Israel destroyed during the most recent conflict, the aerial drones, the underwater drones, and some of the more advanced weaponry that's appeared on the battlefield. It's all thanks to Iran. What I think is notable now is that there is nothing getting in the way of this activity. In fact, the opposite. The United States and the P5+1 are openly negotiating with Iran. They've left this kind of regional destabilizing activity off of the table deliberately. They're focusing in a very narrow way on the nuclear issue alone. And in fact, what we're going to see is roughly $100 billion worth of sanctions relief that will go to the regime, and that money will, without question, trickle down into the hands of other regional actors like Hamas, but also Hezbollah, the Houthis, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, all with the goal of furthering Iran's destabilizing activities around the region. And I would actually even go a step farther, that if in fact a deal is signed, and from all indications we're hearing that it could be this week, it was actually supposed to be yesterday or the day before, now it's been delayed, I think, in part because of Russian involvement in these negotiations. But I think what we're going to see is essentially a situation whereby the United States funds both sides of the next Gaza conflict. And that's no small issue here, that the United States will be giving funds to Israel pursuant to the MOU, which is signed by the American Congress. And so this is approved. And then you'll have another situation where in a deal that is not approved by the Senate and is not approved by anything other than the executive, you're going to be seeing indirectly probably hundreds of millions of dollars flow to the coffers of Hamas. So that's a huge problem. The next issue, the next sort of agitator is sort of trying to undermine the regional order that is coming together at this moment is Turkey. What's interesting now is that Turkey, after years of supporting Hamas, providing political, diplomatic, and financial assistance to that terrorist organization, you actually see a movement right now, I think in part anyway, due to the tumult in Ukraine and Russia. The Turks are nervous and they want to go back to the West. And so they're actually doing outreach to the Israelis. And there is a visit that is likely to take place between Israeli President Herzog and—
It's taking place right now.
It's right. So it's happening at this moment. I thought it was later on this afternoon. But this is all happening right now as the Turks are hedging, and they're looking to perhaps step back from the brink after years of supporting Hamas. And so I see there being a potentially positive development, although it's unclear to me after all of the support that Turkey has given. In fact, Turkey was directly involved in the outbreak of the 2014 Gaza conflict because of Saleh Arouri, the Hamas leader that was based in Turkey, that funded and planned the kidnapping and killing of the 3 teens in the West Bank. That was ultimately what led to the war in the first place. And so I think important to note there. Very briefly, two other actors that are worth noting, the Qataris. They have consistently been the ATM or piggy bank of various Muslim Brotherhood movements, including Hamas. They are playing the role of both arsonist and firefighter. They continue to say that they want to provide funds to Hamas or the Hamas government in the Gaza Strip as a means to prevent conflict. But then, of course, we know that once the money gets in on the ground in the Gaza Strip, it is ultimately diverted to Hamas for whatever purposes it desires, and that could be for the building of tunnels, it could be for the building of rockets, it could be for any of its other war-making capabilities. And so the Qataris have been a real problem. The Israelis continue to work to them, to my great surprise, despite the fact that they are effectively still an enemy of the Emiratis, as well as the Saudis, the Bahrainis. That Gulf spat dating back to 2016, 2017 is still very relevant to this day. And it's really remarkable that the Israelis continue to allow for Qatar to operate in the way that it does. The last outlier that I'll say here, the last country that's actively trying to undermine this normalization, regional reordering is actually a surprising one. Most people are not aware of it, and that's Malaysia. Malaysia has become a training ground for Hamas. It's become a jurisdiction away from the front where Hamas engineers have trained in the development of weaponry. They go to school there. There have been a couple of remarkable operations, allegedly the Mossad taking out some Hamas leaders that have been on the ground in Malaysia. They had a very active role. The Malaysians had a very active role in some of the online activity during the war. They really went after supporters of Israel, myself included, as I tweeted, not in support of Israel, but noted that Malaysia had been involved in some Hamas activity in the past. I was pummeled with tens of thousands of Malaysian trolls who did not want Malaysia to be featured prominently in the discussion about the war that had been taking place. So there are some outliers here that I think will need to be neutralized if the regional order continues to take shape in the way that it does. But I do believe that the regional order is changing. It's changing for the better. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict is really only localized in the Gaza Strip, and really it's been, I think, awarded to the highest bidder. I mean, Hamas is willing to work with the countries that are willing to support it, but it really, one gets a sense that it's no longer organic in the way that it was during the first intifada of the late 1980s or the mid 2000s, the second intifada, where it looked like the Palestinians were, sort of openly and organically engaging in conflict with Israel. Now the West Bank has remained relatively quiet, and the Gaza Strip is promoted, war in the Gaza Strip is promoted by external actors along the lines of those that I've described today. So some real changes taking place, I think exciting things, and I think it's probably good that the United States is spending less time focusing on this and more time focusing on the real challenges that await us, be they Russia or China or some of the other issues like cyber, where I think those are really going to be the things that keep America occupied in the years to come. I'll stop there.
No, thanks, John. Thanks for that. And you raised a number of really interesting issues, and you and Yossi both talked about the changing internal dynamics within the Palestinian Authority. And it brings to mind, this phrase that we use in Washington all the time, that it takes two to tango, right? And the predicate to the idea of some sort of durable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian confrontation is the idea that you have partners, you have ready, willing partners on both sides. But as both of you pointed out, the politics within the Palestinian Authority are changing pretty dramatically, right? The balance of power has shifted away from the PLO, if it ever was there, right? Since the rise of Hamas as a political entity, towards Hamas, towards a more rejectionist, radical strain. And it is something that frankly, from the outside perspective, draws the the eye as making a resolution more difficult, more challenging, right? So I guess my question here is, and Yossi, you started, I want you to to continue the thought that you started. right? What's the state of play within the Palestinian Authority itself, right? Who's up, who's down? What, from the Israeli perspective, what are we to expect in sort of in the years to come? Because that's going to set the table for everything that follows.
Well, I think that the Palestinian Authority is such a fragmented. The Palestinian constituency is such a fragmented entity that it's very difficult to say who's up and who's down, because you have two struggles happening at the same time. One is between Hamas and the PA, which is in which one can say that Hamas is gaining strength and PA is becoming weaker. But not a less important struggle is happening within the PA, between the different factions that comprise Fatah together, because they are all preparing themselves for the day after, as they call it. Yes, when Abu Mazen leaves office, and in whatever way this is going to happen, and they are all preparing, and this includes elements within the Fatah, like supporters of Abu Mazen, and he's trying to strengthen them, Hussein al-Sheikh and Majid Faraj. It includes people that are against Abu Mazen within the Fatah, like Barouti on the one hand and Dakhlan on the other, and the Jibril Rajoub, of course, who is in favor of Abu Mazen, but doesn't like Faraj and the Sheikh. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's happening. But on top of that, it includes many local forces around the West Bank. Each one of them is preparing for the small battle that he's going to be involved in. And we see what's happening in Hebron, we see what's happening in the refugee camps, we see what's happening in several other areas. Everybody is preparing for something that can end up with a total chaos, because nobody really has enough power to overcome all the factions that are preparing to battle, including Hamas, by the way. And so it's a very dangerous situation, which means, by the way, that we also have to be prepared for the day after, because this chaos may require us to get involved and intervene, and to mitigate the implications for our security. And this is something that everybody is totally preoccupied with. It's this internal battle. All of that is happening. I have one small disagreement with Jonathan, with what he said. Yes, until yesterday, or until today, that the regional tendency impact on the Palestinian issue is positive. Normalization and other things that are happening in the region are sending a message to the Palestinians, okay, have a reality check and adopt some different approach. But if the JCPOA is re-entered by the United States, the impact is going to be, as Jonathan said, but he didn't mention it in the end. The impact on the Palestinian arena is going to be very negative. It's all of a sudden, not only that anyhow people respect more the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad than they respect the PA, but they will be able also to recruit more easily people to their side with the growing amount of resources they're going to be afforded with. And this is going to have an impact on the situation, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And I'm worried about the repercussions of this move that I really cannot understand why it is done. Or I cannot justify, I can understand, but I cannot justify why it is done. But it's going to take place anyhow, and the impact on the Palestinian arena is going to be negative, and the positive trend that we've seen might suffer considerable difficulties in the coming future. So
Yossi, I don't disagree with you, by the way. We don't disagree.
Okay. So we are on the same page. That's even better. So it's, yes, I think that, and I don't know, I won't be surprised if Abu Mazen will approach the Iranians too. And, so he has problems with the Turks right now, as Jonathan mentioned. he might go straight to the Iranians. We saw that he just nominated a new ambassador, which happened to be the daughter of the previous ambassador to Tehran. And so it's, I think this is something that can happen. Abu Arafat did it in the past when he was at the time, in a time of need. And I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Abu Mazen will follow the same line. Everything before he's going to really change his position on the conflict. And that's something to worry about.
You know, while we're talking about things to worry about, I'll give you one more. This is, after all, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? You probably saw the headlines overnight about the Emiratis and Saudis not picking up the phone when Biden called. And I have to say that more than anything right now, it causes real concern. That the Abraham Accords, I don't want to say that they're going to fray, because I think the Israelis are going to maintain good relations with the Arab states regardless. But one of the sort of common glue that the Israelis had with their Arab normalization partners was the United States. It was this alliance that they shared. It's now clear, I think, that as the crisis in Ukraine deepens, as we see Russia becoming more aggressive, and as our energy policy here in the United States begins to unravel as a result of the sanctions that we've put on the Russian oil sector, and as the United States scrambles to look for alternative sources of energy, they went to the Saudis and to the Emiratis. And of course, that's very natural that they would do this, given that they're major energy producers, global leaders in this space. But this comes after a full year of the Biden administration practicing what I could only describe as diplomatic arson with these countries. The complete ignoring of the security concerns of the Saudis and Emiratis as it relates to the Houthi battle in Yemen, the decision to delist the Houthis as a terrorist organization, the decision to very personally spurn MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. All of these things were, I think, really designed to score partisan points here in the United States. This was something that I think many hardcore Democrats in particular wanted to do. It was kind of, well, Trump did X, so we're going to do Y. Trump was close with the Saudis and the Gulfies. We don't want that. We want to differentiate ourselves, and therefore we are going to go 180 degrees and be openly antagonistic. And it never made sense to me at the time when it happened at the beginning of the Biden administration back in late January, early February of last year. And it certainly doesn't make any sense now. A year later, you can begin to see how we still need these countries, and not just to maintain a regional order that they're doing with the Israelis. And they've actually, I think, brought some greater stability to what has previously been a very dangerous region. But then on top of that, you see how they're absolutely necessary for energy security. And it was very short-sighted on the part of the United States. So I think we've got a lot of work to do here in Washington to try to rebuild some of those bridges. I don't know how easily they will be rebuilt with the current leadership. I think it will require a significant effort, and I'm not sure whether it's one that the Biden administration has the bandwidth to mount, given the fact that we have a hot war going on in Ukraine at the moment, and we've got an Iran deal that, if it's signed, the Arab states are only going to harden their positions vis-a-vis the United States. They will be irate about a renewed deal that gives Iran the kind of money that we're expecting to flow to the coffers of the Islamic Republic. So we've got some significant challenges ahead, on top of, I think, what Yossi already mentioned.
If I may add to that, or one comment on that. Yep. In order to deal with the Iranians, now that the Americans have this attitude, it's important for the Gulfies to have strong relations with Israel, because otherwise they deal with the Iranians from a total position of weakness. The only strength they can show is their relations with Israel. And I think this is yes, the danger is there to the Abrahamic Accords, but I think that still it's critical for them to have these good relations with Israel even when they want to speak with the Iranians, as they do. And we see the Iranians are trying to tempt them to get closer and so on and so forth. And so I think this is something that we have to remember. And as I was saying all the time, it's up to us to show them that this is something worth nurturing for a long time, because it's our interest in that. And so that's why you see the Israelis are going out of the way to strengthen the relations and to put some tangible content in it, because we want everybody to know it was a good bargain to join the Abrahamic Accords, and it's a good idea for more countries to join in. That's, in my mind, something very important. We are doing a relatively good job on that.
I agree, Yossi. Yeah, I agree. The only thing that I'll just add, though, is that, the reason why the Abraham Accords happened, I mean, we could give credit to Trump. We could say that it was his, brilliant diplomatic mind that forged it. But really, in reality, it was the deal in the first place back in 2015 that I think prompted the Israelis and the Gulf states to look at one another and realize that they needed to rely on each other, because the U.S. was leaving the region or leaving them to their own devices. But I think that what strengthened it even more was the fact that Israel was openly striking Iranian assets around the region, whether through cyber means or kinetic means. And quite frankly, I think the Gulf states respected this and were even in awe of Israel's audacity and its skill level in the military realm. I think that it will be important, by the way. It's not just that I think Israel is going to be speaking with a more quiet voice. You will not see Bennett go to a joint session of Congress and openly oppose the deal the way that Bibi did with his famous speech in 2015. We're going to, I think, need to see Israel step up in some of its kinetic activities if the goal is to keep the coalition of moderate states in the region, those that are opposed to Iran. I think that may ultimately be the glue, because it certainly won't be the United States and its diplomatic efforts. It certainly won't be Bennett's public relations efforts here. I think he's going to take a much more quiet approach. So Israel's going to have to, I think, lead by example. And that's probably the realm where they will likely need to do it.
All right. Well, let me put a pin on this, because I want to do two things. First of all, I want to sort of redirect the conversation a little bit, because I did have a question about something that both of you mentioned, which is sort of the declining role of the United States. But before I do, I wanted to mention to the audience members, to those of you that are watching, if you have a question, we're getting towards the end of the hour, but if you have a question, please feel free, throw it up using the chat function. And we'll try to get to it and try to get to as many of them as we can if they're there. But for both of you, and Yossi, sort of to start with you, you mentioned the sort of the receding influence or the receding profile of the United States in the region, and this is certainly what I saw when I was in the region, right? That the trend lines are happening, the economic and political connectivity is happening, but Washington isn't really part of the conversation. But other countries are. And so what I'm curious about here, and John, I'll ask you the same question when Yossi's done, but as the United States declines, right, as we pivot away from the Middle East towards the Indo-Pacific or what have you, who are the other players that are rising in the region, right? Russia's obviously sort of front and center now because of what's happening in Ukraine. That's one. It's not the only one. Who are they? And what do they think about the Israeli-Palestinian issue? What influence are they exerting over regional trends generally and over this issue specifically?
Well, on the international level, it's Russia to some extent. They don't really bother that much about the Palestinian issue, but they do care about the region. I think the region is important for Russia, and it's an opportunity for them to show the difference between relying on Russia and relying on the United States. If you rely on Russia, you have a friend that will intervene in to help you, as they did in Syria. If you count on the Americans, you end up like the Ukrainians. So it's for them, it's a very important message, and that is well accepted here in the region, because the region is used to choosing the strong horses, So right now, Russia seems to be much more like that. But we shall see what happens in Ukraine eventually. The other power that is intervening is China. We see the agreement between China and Iran. We see China is all over the place, and China is even trying to get better relations with the Gulf states and with Israel itself. And this is coming to some extent, definitely from the point of view of Washington, and Jonathan can relate to that, on the expense of Washington. And they don't use necessarily military means for that purpose, more economic means, but it's at the end of the day, it's the same impact. And we see China much more involved. Unfortunately, both China and Russia are not necessarily on our side when it comes to the Palestinian issue. But both of them, although they pretend to have an interest in that, and the Chinese have their envoy for that purpose, they don't really intervene, and they don't play a very important role. I don't think that the Palestinians can count on them to change the situation. That said, it is left for the regional powers to play a bigger role in what's happening here. And first and foremost, for Israel, we became much more influential party in the situation in the Middle East, and more than anybody else. The fact that we are now having better relations with Turkey is important. Of course, the Abraham Accords, the cooperation we have with Egypt and Jordan is becoming much more tangible in their daily life and their daily security. That's something that affects, the energy sector. The developments in the energy sector created a totally different connection between us and Egypt and Jordan, and also has an impact, not only the energy sector, it also has an impact about our relations with Greece and Cyprus. So all in all, we are playing a much more important role regionally than we used to be playing in the past. It's, Israel was always dreaming of the day in which it's going to be integrated into the region. We are totally weaved into the region now. It's an amazing change that took place. And the other party that is playing against us is, of course, Iran. Is also much more involved in the region, much more influential. They managed to build this Shiite northern axis with Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and they have this influence in Yemen, and they are not shy of using force. Neither are we, but they too are not shy of using force. They usually do it through their proxies, but it doesn't matter. From time to time, they do it themselves. And it's a real confrontation between Israel and Iran as regional powers over who is going to have the say about the way things develop in the region. I would like to add one more concern that we didn't speak about enough, but this is that when the Palestinians are so frustrated, one of the results is almost always a rise in terror. And I think we already see in the last couple of months some signs of that happening. We're speaking as after a week when we had the 4 terror attacks in Israel. And the month of December, we had 12 attacks, and it's more than the usual. There's a small uptick in the level of terrorism. I think to some extent it's a reflection of the frustration of the Palestinians with the fact that they don't manage to convince anybody to come to their support. So we have to bear that in mind too in the coming future. I hope we know how to handle it, but it's not going to be easy.
Got it. Well, thank you. So, John, same question to you, because in your comments, you also alluded to this very positive trend line that we're seeing, but it's a trend line that's sort of autonomous. It's independent, and the U.S. is less and less a player as we are preoccupied with other things, including running in the opposite direction. With the new sort of the revived, the efforts to revive the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. So in that vacuum, right, nature abhors a vacuum. What are you seeing in the region in terms of Russian activity and Chinese activity, and how does that play in the Israeli-Palestinian arena?
So all good questions. Look, the first thing that I'll just say is the U.S. being a little less involved in the region is not a bad thing. the US being less obsessive about trying to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and investing time and effort and the prestige of a president or a secretary of state or even other senior officials. I think it's been time not well spent historically, and ultimately I think the Israelis should be given the ability to handle these things as they see fit, especially now with some of their peace partners, their normalization partners in the region. One gets a sense that the right people are assuming leadership in the region and they can handle the affairs of the region on their own, and that's not a bad thing. Okay. I do have concerns, though, when the United States does get involved, it's for the wrong reasons, right? Leaving Afghanistan has absolutely shaken a lot of our allies to their core, looking at the impact of that withdrawal and how poorly planned it was, and not recognizing what the impact on the region would be. It's a huge problem. Signing the Iran nuclear deal, I mean, it is absolutely, we are looking at a complete loss of confidence on the part of Israel and their Gulf allies in terms of how they view the United States and its leadership on the world stage. And so, yes, they're going to be looking to the other world powers that seem to have a little bit more of a transactional approach to the region. But they're also just a bit more, I guess, transparent or easy to understand what's motivating them. So, we see China trying to sort of muscle its way into the region. Israel, by the way, has taken a lot of heat for some of the work that it's done in terms of contracts with the Chinese. By and large, I would say that those issues have been resolved with the United States. The U.S. had expressed some real concern about the extent to which Israel might be leveraged by the Chinese, specifically the Haifa port incident dating back to 2015. I believe most of those issues are now solved, but I still get a sense, though, that even if the Israelis have solved their issues with the US, you've got lots of other countries in the region that are being wooed by China's financial power, by its soft power, and by its hard power. And so there is concern, I think, and Israel should be very, I would say, aware of some of these changes that are taking place as the US loses its grip and as China comes in. Yossi sort of hinted at it. The Chinese are not big fans of Israel or the US-led world order, and they'll look to undermine it wherever they can. And that is I think that's a problem for Israel long-term. Short-term, it may not be a significant issue, but I don't believe that the Chinese can be trusted here. And I would certainly urge our Israeli and Gulf friends to take a good hard look at what this relationship, what it stands to bring to the region long-term. Short-term, I get it, easy money, more transactional approaches, less strings attached with the United States. Yeah, I get that, but long-term, I think it's a disaster waiting to happen. With Russia, I see a little less influence than maybe some would give it credit for. There's been a lot of talk about how the Russians potentially have done a better job than maybe we realized in terms of penetrating the Middle East, that the decision by the UAE or Saudis not to pick up the phone when Biden called, that's been painted as a Russian win. I would actually just describe it as an American unforced error, an American loss. Right? This is the direct result of ill-advised policies undertaken by the Biden administration, right? The decision to spurn our Gulf friends and to antagonize them when we could have just simply downgraded the relationship a little bit and encouraged them to embrace human rights or to embrace rule of law just a bit more. That's how we should have handled it. I think we're just watching a policy backfire in real time right now as it relates to the Russians. The Chinese are a greater strategic threat in my view, and I do believe that it's going to require a real assessment on the part of our friends over there to determine what their best interest is. I think the Chinese have done a great job in trying to persuade them that they are benign actors. I think we know otherwise.
Well, and thanks for that. And so I'm mindful of the fact that we're closing in on the top of the hour. So just a final question to bring this home, gentlemen. And very quickly, right? Just a minute each, but I'm curious, to sort of loop this back around to where we started, to the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Is a breakthrough possible? What's the future here? What do you see, both positive and negative? Yossi?
Well, I think that a breakthrough is possible, but not in the near future. And much more pressure should be put on the Palestinians to adopt a different approach, like the issue of paying salaries to terrorists, something that when this comes to an end, there's going to be peace. When the Palestinians follow the Mansour Abbas approach, it says that quality of life is a more pressing issue than insisting on the disappearance of Israel. That is something that is going to bring a change. It's not going to happen tomorrow morning, unfortunately. We shall live with the consequences of that in the foreseeable future. And also, let me say again, thank you for having me, and thanks to Barak Siner. I see his name on the the screen, for bringing all of us together. Thank you.
No, thanks, Yossi. So John, same question to you. So how do you see this playing out in the near future and maybe even in the longer term?
Near future, I see a disruption of the order that has been forming. I think, the Gulf states are typically a bit more skittish. They're trying to read the tea leaves. They're trying to understand exactly how their world has changed. And so it may actually prompt a dialing back of engagement with the United States. And so you could see a weakening, if you will, or at least a pause in some of this activity. But I do see that in general, that the normalization agreements, this new regional order is likely to continue as it was, and that is a positive. In terms of where things go next with the Palestinians, I would say that the big thing to watch for is succession. Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, is not a spring chicken, as we say. He's in his 80s. He is well past his expiration date, both in terms of his allotted time to be in office, but also just in terms of the energy. I mentioned this earlier. This is a guy that, people can't believe that he's still sitting in that chair. He's falling asleep in it, quite literally, in meetings, and there's just not a lot of confidence. The question is he removed? Does he depart the scene under natural causes? But then more importantly, who comes after? There is no succession plan. I think it will be chaotic. I think that a lot rides on who comes in next. The last time around, it was sort of a papal conclave, if you will, where the PLO executive selected Abu Mazen, and then it was only confirmed through a vote that was really a formality. The question is, who comes next? And I think there are a number of people that could viably serve in this position. But really, if you're looking for the prospects of peace, you're going to need somebody that doesn't have blood on their hands, that has the trust of the Israeli system, maybe has the trust of the US system for that matter, depending on how much the US wants to get involved. But that's the big thing that I watch right now. And I think the fact that we've not tried to guarantee a more predictable succession process, I don't mean the selection of a person, but I'm talking about having a system that will be in place that can ensure a calm and orderly succession. That is really what is missing here. And I would just urge our State Department to move quickly, perhaps with other partners around the world, to get a system in place that would allow for an orderly transfer of power.
So we'll have to let that be the last word. Thank you both, Yossi and Jonathan. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This has been a tremendous session. Thank you again to Barak for convening. And with that, panel is over. Thank you.
Thank you.